If your parents lied to you about your entire past, would you ever forgive them? Imagine waking up one day to find out that everything you believed about yourself, your childhood, your family, even the scars on your own skin, was a complete lie. That the people who raised you weren't your real parents. That your entire identity was built on deception. Would you still love them? Would you hate them? Would you want to know the truth, even if it shattered your world? This is exactly what happened to 12-year-old Jessica Fisher. All her life, she believed the scar on her face was from a fire she barely survived as a baby. But one day, she saw something, a tiny newspaper article, that made her blood run cold. What she uncovered wasn't just a dark secret, it was the truth about who she really was. And trust me, you won't believe how this story ends.
Jessica Fisher had always known she was different. It wasn't just because of her fiery red hair that stood out in a crowd or the sharp green eyes that often drew compliments. No, it was the scar, the raised pinkish mark that stretched across her left cheek. The scar that had defined her life before she was even old enough to understand what it meant. For as long as she could remember, her parents had told her the same story. When she was just a toddler, their house had caught fire in the middle of the night. It had been a miracle that she survived at all. The flames had been relentless, consuming everything in their path. But somehow, her parents had managed to pull her from the wreckage. They were lucky, they always said. Lucky to be alive. Lucky that she hadn't been hurt worse. But Jessica never felt lucky. Growing up with the scar had been a battle she fought every day. Strangers stared without shame, their eyes flicking to her cheek and then quickly away, as if looking at her for too long would be impolite. Kids at school weren't as subtle. The whispers started when she was little, the murmurs from the other children as she walked past in the hallway. Did you see her face? She looks like a monster. I bet she started the fire herself. They weren't creative, but they were cruel. Some kids asked questions bluntly, as if she owed them an explanation. Others simply avoided her, as though whatever had happened to her might be contagious. Jessica learned to pretend it didn't bother her. She laughed when her best friend, Sophie, made jokes about how her scar made her look like a warrior. She rolled her eyes when adults told her she was beautiful just the way she was. But late at night, when she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't stop herself from wondering why this had to happen to her. Why she had to be the one to carry this mark for the world to see. Sometimes, she would stand in front of the mirror, tracing the edges of the scar with her fingertips, wishing she could peel it off like an old sticker, wishing that, just for one day, she could walk through the world without it. Without the looks, without the whispers, without the weight of always being reminded that she was different. Her parents did their best to reassure her. Her father, James, always told her that she was strong, that the scar was proof of her survival. Her mother, Catherine, always looked at her with soft eyes and promised that someday she would understand why things happened the way they did. But Jessica wasn't interested in being strong. She wanted to be normal. She wanted to be able to take a photo without angling her face to hide the worst part of the scar. She wanted to walk into a room without feeling like every pair of eyes turned toward her. Most of all, she wanted to stop feeling like a walking reminder of something she couldn't even remember. The fire was a story she knew by heart, but the memories were not her own. Everything she knew about that night came from her parents. How they had woken up to smoke, how her father had carried her outside while her mother called for help, how they had stood in the cold night air, watching their home collapse into ashes. She had asked once why there were no photos of their old house. Her mother had simply shaken her head, saying, "Some things are better left in the past." Jessica had nodded then, accepting the answer. But deep down, she had always felt like something didn't quite add up. It wasn't until one ordinary Saturday morning that she would begin to understand why. The morning started like any other Saturday in the Fisher household. The sun poured through the curtains, casting soft golden light over the living room. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee and the faint hint of cleaning supplies, evidence of Catherine's usual weekend routine. Jessica Fisher sat curled up on the couch, her long legs tucked beneath her as she scrolled through her phone, texting Sophie about their weekend plans. Her thumbs moved rapidly over the screen, the rhythm of her typing blending with the soft creak of wood and the occasional metallic clang of tools. Across the room, her father, James, was crouched near the kitchen cabinets, muttering under his breath as he struggled to fix the hinges on the cupboard door. "I swear, these things weren't this complicated back in the day," he grumbled, adjusting his grip on the screwdriver. Jessica barely glanced up. "Maybe you're just old, Dad," she teased, smirking as she sent another message to Sophie. James chuckled, shaking his head. Ruthless. Their easy banter was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and then closing with a soft thud. Catherine stepped inside, balancing a small stack of envelopes, magazines, and the crisp, folded pages of the Morning Herald under one arm. "I swear, we get more junk mail than actual mail," she called out as she made her way toward the coffee table. "Anything interesting in there?" James asked without looking up, still focused on the stubborn cupboard. "Doubt it. Probably just bills and grocery flyers." Catherine set the stack down and began sorting through the pile, flicking through each envelope with practiced efficiency. Jessica, still absorbed in her phone, barely registered the conversation. That was, until she heard the sound of rustling newspaper and then silence. It lasted only a second, maybe two, but it was enough to catch her attention. She looked up just in time to see her mother's hands go completely still, her fingers frozen on the newspaper page she had just unfolded. Her expression, usually calm and collected, shifted. Her face lost its color. Her mouth parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Jessica frowned. "Mom!" Catherine didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the page, her eyes scanning whatever was in front of her over and over, as if trying to make sense of something shocking. Jessica sat up straighter, her phone momentarily forgotten. "Mom, what is it?" Still no answer. A strange tension filled the room, one that even James picked up on. He finally turned away from his project, setting his screwdriver down as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Cat?" he prompted, his voice laced with concern. Catherine blinked rapidly, as if snapping out of a trance. "It's nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. Her voice was tight, slightly higher than usual. Without another word, she rolled up the newspaper, folded it in half, and pressed it tightly against her chest. Jessica narrowed her eyes. "Nothing?" That was not the reaction of someone who had just read nothing. James raised an eyebrow at his wife. "Catherine, I said it's nothing," she repeated, her tone firmer this time. "Just a boring article. Nothing worth reading." Jessica wasn't convinced. The tension in the room grew heavier as Catherine abruptly stood, newspaper still clutched in her grip, and made her way toward the kitchen. James and Jessica exchanged a glance. "What was that about?" Jessica asked, her curiosity fully piqued now. James shook his head. "No idea." Jessica turned back to watch her mother disappear into the kitchen. A few seconds later, she heard the sound of the trash bin lid opening and then closing. She sucked in a breath. She threw it away. Jessica sat there, staring at the empty space where her mother had just been. A newspaper article had made her mother go pale. Something on that page had sent a shiver through her body, had made her act like she had just seen a ghost. And instead of talking about it, she had thrown it away. Jessica didn't know what was in that newspaper, but she suddenly had the strangest feeling. Whatever it was, it had something to do with her. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her mother's reaction had been too extreme, too unnatural. People didn't freeze like that over something insignificant. They didn't clutch newspapers to their chest as if shielding a secret and then rush to throw them away. For the next few minutes, she sat on the couch, pretending to be focused on her phone, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The image of her mother's pale face, the tension in her posture, the way she had practically bolted out of the room. It all replayed in her mind. She tried to convince herself that she was overthinking it. Maybe it was just some tragic news story that had hit too close to home. Or maybe, she reasoned, it was an article about someone they knew, an old friend, a former neighbor. That would explain the shock, wouldn't it? And yet, something about it didn't sit right. Eventually, curiosity won out. Jessica set her phone down and made her way toward the kitchen, casually peeking inside to make sure her mother wasn't around. The coast was clear. She stepped toward the trash bin, lifting the lid just enough to peer inside. Her stomach dropped. The newspaper wasn't there. She lifted the lid higher, rummaging through the discarded items. Empty food wrappers, a crumpled-up grocery list, yesterday's mail, but no sign of the newspaper. Jessica frowned, a strange unease creeping up her spine. Her mother had thrown it away. She had heard it. So where was it? Had her mother taken it out of the house entirely? The thought unsettled her more than it should have. It wasn't just about the newspaper anymore. It was about what it represented. Her mother had deliberately hidden something from her, something important enough to remove completely from the house. She straightened, glancing toward the hallway where her mother had last disappeared. Was she being paranoid? Maybe. Was her mother being overly dramatic? Definitely. Jessica sighed, pushing the lid back down and walking away. Fine. If her mother didn't want her to see whatever was in that paper, then so be it. She had better things to worry about than some random article. And yet, no matter how hard she tried to brush it off, the unease lingered. She wouldn't understand why, not yet. Not until much later that day, when something completely unexpected happened. Something that would make her wish she had fought harder to see what was in that newspaper. Jessica sat in the back seat of the car, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stared out the window. The buildings and trees blurred past, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the same cycle of frustration that had been brewing inside her for years. She hated these checkups. It wasn't that she disliked the doctor himself. Dr. Smith was kind, always gentle, never making her feel like she was some medical anomaly. But these visits were a constant reminder that her scar was still there, that no matter how many creams, treatments, or procedures she went through, the mark on her face refused to fade away. She sighed, tilting the mirror in the sun visor to glance at her reflection. The scar stretched across her left cheek, a raised pinkish reminder of a past she couldn't even remember. Her fingers ghosted over it, feeling the uneven texture of her skin. She had scrolled through enough social media posts to know that other kids got their scars fixed. She had seen before and after photos of girls who had undergone facial reconstruction, their once flawed skin now smooth and perfect. So why couldn't she? As they pulled into the clinic's parking lot, Jessica finally broke the silence. What if I got cosmetic surgery? Her parents both turned to look at her. James, who had been about to unbuckle his seatbelt, froze mid-motion. What? Jessica swallowed but forced herself to keep going. I was just thinking. Maybe it would be better if I got cosmetic surgery or something. Catherine turned fully in her seat, her expression unreadable. Jessica, where's this coming from? I see it online all the time, she said quickly, trying to make it sound logical instead of desperate. There are kids getting facial reconstruction for their birthdays. Parents pay for it as a gift. I saw a video the other day, and the results were amazing. You can't even tell they ever had scars. A heavy silence settled in the car. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Sweetheart, you're only 12. You don't need any of that. Jessica's face heated. But I could. I looked it up. There are doctors who do it for younger kids. Catherine's eyes softened. Jess, that kind of surgery is expensive. If we could afford it, maybe we'd consider it, but that's a big decision. It's not just about money. It's about your health, your well-being. Jessica gritted her teeth, the familiar sting of disappointment settling in her chest. So that's it? I just have to live like this forever? Jess, people stare at me? She blurted out, her voice cracking slightly. They whisper about me at school. They act like I'm some kind of freak. Catherine reached out, placing a gentle hand on Jessica's shoulder, but she shrugged it off. James spoke, his tone gentle but firm. You're beautiful just the way you are. Jessica let out a bitter laugh. Every adult says that. It doesn't change anything. She pushed open the car door before either of them could respond, stepping out onto the pavement with a huff. She knew they meant well, but they didn't understand. How could they? They weren't the ones living with it. As she walked toward the clinic, she clenched her fists at her sides. If her parents wouldn't help her, she'd have to figure out another way. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and faintly of lavender air freshener, a strange mix of sterility and forced comfort. Jessica had been here so many times before that the waiting area, the worn magazines stacked on the coffee table, and even the hum of the overhead lights felt oddly familiar. She checked in at the front desk, nodding absent-mindedly as the receptionist confirmed her appointment. Her parents took seats in the waiting area, but Jessica remained standing for a moment, staring at her reflection in the clinic's glass door. She didn't know what she was expecting to see. Some kind of change? Something to show that all these months of treatments were working? Nothing looked different. Her name was called, and she followed the nurse down the hall to an examination room. Moments later, Dr. Smith entered, his usual warm smile in place. He was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. Jessica had been seeing him for years, and while she appreciated his patience, she hated the fact that she was still here. "How's my favorite patient today?" he asked, pulling up his rolling stool and flipping through her file. Jessica sighed. "Same as always." Dr. Smith nodded, making a few notes. "Let's take a look." She leaned back as he adjusted the examination light, tilting her head slightly so he could better assess the scar. His fingers were gentle as he lightly pressed along the edges, feeling the texture of the healed skin. "The pigmentation has lightened a bit," he murmured, mostly to himself. "And the tissue is flattening. Slowly, but it's definitely happening." Jessica exhaled sharply. Slowly being the key word. Dr. Smith chuckled. "Healing takes time, Jessica." She crossed her arms. "What about laser therapy?" His expression didn't change, but his pen stopped moving. "That's a more aggressive treatment. Can help with discoloration and texture, but it comes with risks, pain, long recovery time, potential scarring of its own. It's also significantly more expensive." Jessica hesitated. She already knew what her parents would say about that last part. Still, she pushed on. "Would it work faster?" Dr. Smith considered her for a moment before nodding. "Potentially, but it wouldn't erase the scar completely. And it's not something we typically recommend for younger patients unless there's a medical necessity." Jessica sighed, feeling that familiar wave of frustration creep in again. Then, out of nowhere, a question popped into her head. It was something she had never thought to ask before. Something so simple, so obvious, that she couldn't believe it had never crossed her mind. "Dr. Smith," she said slowly, "if my scar is from a fire, why is it only on my face?" He looked up from his clipboard, his eyebrows drawing together slightly. "What do you mean?" Jessica sat up a little straighter. "I was a baby when it happened, right? My parents said I was found in the wreckage of our burning house. Shouldn't I have burns on my arms, my legs? Somewhere else?" Dr. Smith's expression shifted into something unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "That's an interesting question," he admitted. "Usually, in fire-related injuries, burns don't happen in just one isolated area, especially in young children, since they tend to curl into themselves when exposed to heat." Jessica's pulse quickened. "So, what does that mean?" Dr. Smith hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I wasn't the doctor who initially treated your burns, Jessica. By the time I started seeing you, the healing process was already well underway. But based on your medical history, it does seem unusual." She swallowed, a strange unease settling in her stomach. "Should I ask my parents?" Dr. Smith nodded. "I think that would be a good idea." Jessica bit her lip. She didn't know why, but something about this conversation left her feeling unsettled. As she walked out of the examination room, her prescription slip in hand, she felt more confused than ever. Her whole life she had believed one story, one version of the truth. But now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure it had been the truth at all. Jessica stood at the bus stop, her arms crossed against the slight breeze. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and exhaust fumes from passing cars. She had just finished her appointment at the dermatologist's clinic, but instead of feeling hopeful, she felt more frustrated than ever. Her scar was still there. It would always be there. And now, there was a new question burning in her mind, one she couldn't stop thinking about. Why was the scar only on her face? She sighed, pulling her phone out of her pocket. A message from Sophie blinked on the screen, but before she could respond, something caught her eye across the street. A small newspaper kiosk sat on the corner, its metal shelves lined with neatly stacked papers and magazines. Jessica's breath hitched. The Morning Herald, the same newspaper her mother had thrown away that morning, the one that had made her pale and nervous. Jessica's feet moved before she even made the conscious decision to walk. She crossed the street quickly, stepping up to the kiosk as an old man behind the counter gave her a nod of greeting. "Paper's fresh," he said, adjusting a stack. "You looking for today's edition?" Jessica hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yes, please." The old man handed her a crisp copy, and she fished some coins from her pocket, exchanging them with slightly shaky hands. As she turned away, she already started flipping through the pages, her fingers skimming past headlines about politics, weather reports, and sports scores. What had her mother seen? What had been so bad that she had to get rid of the entire newspaper? Her eyes moved quickly, scanning articles without really reading them. And then, her breath caught. It was in the missing persons section, tucked away near the bottom of the page. A photo of a little girl. Jessica's stomach twisted as she stared at the image. The girl in the photograph had fiery red hair, green eyes, a round, youthful face. She looked exactly like Jessica, except for one thing. Her skin was smooth, no scar. Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears as she read the text beneath the photo. Jenny Clark, missing since 10 years ago, last seen at age 2, believed to have been taken from an orphanage. Her vision blurred as she reread the details, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. This had to be a mistake. Coincidence. There were plenty of red-headed girls in the world, right? But as she continued to stare at the picture, something in her gut told her that this wasn't just some random missing child case. She swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the newspaper so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was what her mother had seen that morning. This was what she had tried to hide. And for the first time in her life, Jessica felt the terrifying sensation that her whole world was about to unravel. Jessica's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She snapped a picture of the newspaper article, her fingers moving almost on instinct, saving the image before staring at it again. The little girl, Jenny Clark, stared back at her with bright green eyes and unruly red hair. The resemblance was undeniable, almost eerie. A pit formed in Jessica's stomach. It didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. But then again, she had never seen any baby pictures of herself before the age of 3. Not one. It wasn't something she had ever questioned before. After all, who really cared about baby pictures? But now that she thought about it, wasn't that weird? Most families had albums filled with chubby baby photos, first birthday pictures, and snapshots of a smiling toddler taking her first steps. But Jessica? Nothing. She had always assumed that maybe the pictures were lost in the fire. That was the explanation her parents had given her when she was little. The fire. The very same fire that, according to her parents, had left her scarred but somehow managed to only mark her face. Jessica's stomach twisted. She suddenly felt lightheaded, as if the world around her had tilted slightly off balance. Could it be true? Could she be Jenny Clark? The idea was ridiculous. It was impossible. And yet, the pieces didn't fit. The missing childhood photos. The scar with no explanation that made sense. The way her mother had reacted to the newspaper, as if she had just seen a ghost. Jessica licked her lips, staring at the contact number listed at the bottom of the missing person ad. Someone was still looking for this girl. Someone had been looking for her for 10 years. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't even know why she was doing it. But before she could talk herself out of it, her fingers moved on their own, typing out a message. "Hi, my name is Jessica. I saw the missing person article in today's newspaper. Her thumb hovered over the send button. A voice in her head screamed at her to stop. What if she was wrong? What if this was nothing? What if she was just creating drama over a coincidence? But another voice, a much smaller one, whispered something different. What if you're right? She took a deep breath and pressed send. As soon as the message was gone, regret crashed into her. What have I done? Her fingers tightened around the phone as she stared at the screen, half expecting an immediate response. But nothing happened. Jessica let out a shaky breath, shoving the phone back into her pocket. She told herself it was just in case, just to confirm what she already knew. But deep down, she felt it. Something was wrong, and whether she was ready for it or not, she had just set something in motion that she could never take back. By the time Jessica got home, the weight of the newspaper's revelation sat heavy in her chest. The moment she stepped through the front door, she knew she couldn't pretend everything was normal. Her parents were in the kitchen. Catherine was rinsing dishes in the sink, and James was at the table, flipping through his old toolbox. They looked so ordinary, so parent-like, but Jessica's mind swirled with doubt. How much of this life had been real? How much of it had been a carefully constructed lie? She took a deep breath, stepping forward. Mom, Dad, can I ask you something? Catherine turned off the water and glanced over her shoulder. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Jessica hesitated for only a second before going straight for it. Do we have any baby pictures of me? The air shifted instantly. Catherine's hands stilled on the dish towel. James looked up from his toolbox, his eyebrows knitting together. It was subtle, but she saw it. The hesitation, the quick flicker of something across their faces before they masked it. Catherine was the first to speak. What do you mean? Jessica folded her arms. I don't think I've ever seen any pictures of me before I was 3. Do we have any? There was a pause. Too long. Then her mother forced a smile. Well, honey, you know most of our old pictures were lost in the fire. Jessica's heart pounded. The fire. Always the fire. But wouldn't you have at least one? She pressed. Something from when I was a baby? Everyone has baby pictures, right? She watched as Catherine swallowed hard. Jess, why are you asking this all of a sudden? Jessica took another step forward, her voice sharper now. Because it's weird. Don't you think it's weird? I don't remember anything from before I was 3. I don't have any pictures. You don't even tell me stories about when I was a baby. It's like my life didn't start until after the fire. James finally spoke, his voice measured. Jessica, of course your life started before then. But the fire was a traumatic event. We lost everything. You were too young to remember. It was the same answer they always gave her. The one she had accepted her whole life. But not anymore. Jessica reached into her bag and pulled out the crumpled newspaper, unfolding it with shaking hands. Is this why? She demanded. Catherine gasped. James's face paled. Jessica slammed the paper down on the table, pointing to the missing persons section. This girl, Jenny Clark, she looks just like me. Same hair, same eyes. She went missing 10 years ago. Her parents didn't move. They didn't say anything. That was all the confirmation she needed. Jessica's stomach twisted painfully. Oh my God, she whispered. It's true, isn't it? James recovered first. In a swift motion, he snatched the newspaper from the table. You don't need to be reading this, he said, his voice uncharacteristically firm. Jessica's jaw clenched. Give it back. No. Her heart pounded as she stared at the man she had always called Dad. She barely recognized him in that moment. You're hiding something? She accused, her voice rising. Why won't you tell me? What are you so afraid of? Catherine reached for her, but Jessica stepped back. Sweetheart. Her mother started, her voice trembling. Please, just let this go. Jessica shook her head, her vision blurring with unshed tears. No, I'm done letting things go. You're lying to me. I want the truth. The room was thick with silence, suffocating, unbearable. James's grip on the newspaper tightened, his knuckles turning white. Jessica took a deep breath, forcing herself to steady her shaking hands. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure who her parents really were. And she wasn't sure she ever wanted to find out. Jessica couldn't take it anymore. The suffocating silence. The way her parents kept dodging her questions. The way James had snatched the newspaper like she was some little kid who couldn't handle the truth. She needed to get out of the house. Her hands were still shaking as she stormed upstairs, yanking open her closet and grabbing a backpack. She wasn't even sure what she was packing. Just a few essentials. A hoodie, her charger. All she knew was that she needed space. Needed to breathe. Needed to be somewhere where her entire life didn't feel like it was crumbling beneath her feet. Sophie, her best friend, had always been her safe place. If there was anyone she could trust, anyone who wouldn't treat her like a fragile doll who needed protecting, it was Sophie. Pulling out her phone, she quickly typed a message. "Jess, can I stay at your place tonight?" A response came almost immediately. "Sophie, duh. My mom already said yes. What's going on?" Jessica hesitated. How did she even begin to explain? "Jess, I'll tell you when I get there." She slung her backpack over her shoulder and headed downstairs, her heart pounding. James and Catherine were still in the kitchen. Her mother had her arms crossed, her eyes filled with something Jessica couldn't quite place. Worry? Guilt? Her father stood beside her, his jaw clenched. The newspaper was gone, probably stuffed in some drawer, hidden away like the truth they refused to tell her. Jessica took a deep breath. "I'm staying at Sophie's tonight." Catherine's head snapped up. "Jessica, I don't think. I'm not asking." Her parents exchanged a glance, something silent passing between them. Then James nodded, his voice unusually calm. "We'll drive you." Jessica shook her head. "I'll take the bus." "It's late," Catherine said gently. "Let us take you, sweetheart." Jessica hesitated. She didn't want to be in the car with them, not right now. But arguing would just make everything worse. She just wanted to leave. She exhaled through her nose. "Fine." Catherine's tense shoulders seemed to relax slightly. "Why don't you have some water before we go?" she suggested, already turning to grab a glass from the cupboard. "You look upset. You should stay hydrated." Jessica frowned but didn't argue. The truth was her throat was dry. She took the glass and sipped it absent-mindedly while her mother watched her. The water was warm. Not unpleasant, just a little strange. The glass was only half empty when she set it down, brushing past her parents toward the door. "Let's go," she muttered. James grabbed the car keys and they headed outside. As soon as Jessica settled into the passenger seat, a strange heaviness settled over her. Her limbs felt sluggish. Her eyelids drooped. She blinked, shaking her head slightly, trying to focus. What? A wave of exhaustion crashed over her, so sudden and so unnatural that a flicker of alarm sparked in her chest. She turned to her parents, confusion swirling in her mind. James was watching the road. Catherine was watching her. Jessica tried to speak, but her tongue felt heavy. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold as her vision tunneled. This wasn't normal. She wasn't just tired. Something was wrong. But before she could fight it, before she could ask the question forming in the back of her foggy mind, everything went dark. Jessica's consciousness clawed its way back from the abyss, thick and sluggish, like trying to swim through molasses. Her head ached, a deep, pulsing throb that made it difficult to think. Her body felt wrong, heavy, uncooperative, like she was still half asleep even though her mind was waking up. She tried to move, but her limbs barely responded. Panic crept into her chest, sharp and immediate. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was getting into the car, her parents telling her they would drive her to Sophie's house. She had taken a sip of water. Then nothing. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. She wasn't at Sophie's house. She wasn't even in a familiar place. She was inside a camper. The small, enclosed space smelled of wood and stale air. The tiny table bolted to the floor, cabinets stacked overhead. A thin mattress beneath her pressed against her back. And as she turned her head toward the window, a fresh wave of fear crushed her. Outside, there was no street, no sidewalk, no houses. Just trees. A dense, endless forest stretched in every direction. The sky above tinged with deep blues and purples. Early evening or early morning, she couldn't tell. But one thing was clear. They had taken her. She struggled to push herself up, her muscles weak, her fingers trembling. The drowsiness, the way her body refused to cooperate. They drugged me. The horrifying realization sent a jolt of energy through her. She forced herself upright, fighting against the fog in her brain. Footsteps creaked outside the camper. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as the door swung open, revealing James and Catherine, her parents, or at least the people she had always thought were her parents. James stepped inside first, his face lined with tension, his eyes wary but firm. Catherine followed, wringing her hands together, her expression one of forced calm. "Sweetheart," Catherine said, her voice too soft, too careful. "You're awake." Jessica forced herself to sit up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. James exhaled through his nose. "We needed to get away for a little while." Jessica's hands curled into fists. "Get away from what? I was supposed to go to Sophie's. You lied to me. You." Her breath hitched. "You drugged me." Catherine flinched, but James's jaw tightened. "We did what we had to do," he said, "to keep you safe." Jessica let out a disbelieving laugh, the panic rising fast. "Safe from what? A sleepover? My best friend." James pinched the bridge of his nose, looking tired. "Jessica, don't call me that." The words came out before she could stop them, filled with so much venom that even she was surprised. Because what if that wasn't even her real name? A heavy silence filled the space. Catherine was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know you saw the newspaper." Jessica's blood turned to ice. She stared at them, at the way their expressions had darkened, at the way they weren't even denying it. "You're lying to me," she whispered. James took a step forward. "We love you. You stole me." Her voice cracked, raw and furious, the words bursting out of her like fire. Catherine's face crumbled, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not that simple." Jessica shook her head, pushing herself to her feet despite her body's protests. "It's that simple to me." She turned toward the camper door, her pulse racing. She had to get out of here. She had to run. But before she could take another step, James grabbed her wrist. "Jessica," he said, his voice firm, warning her. She froze. The weight of his grip sent a shiver down her spine. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid of him. Jessica's heart pounded against her ribs as she wrenched her arm away from James's grip, stumbling back until she hit the small table bolted to the camper's floor. The space felt suffocating, the air thick with something unspoken, something about to shatter her entire world. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice shaking. "Right now. No more lies." James and Catherine exchanged a glance. That look, the same one they had given each other at home when she first asked about the newspaper. It was a silent conversation, one Jessica wasn't supposed to understand, but she did now. They were deciding whether or not to finally admit it. Catherine exhaled, rubbing her hands over her face before dropping them to her sides. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not our biological daughter." The words punched the air from Jessica's lungs. She felt like the floor had tilted beneath her, like she was falling and there was nothing to grab onto. James stepped forward. "You were never in a house fire, Jessica." She let out a shaky breath. "No, that's not." She shook her head violently, rejecting it. "That's not possible. You told me." "I know what we told you," Catherine said softly, her voice aching with guilt. "But it wasn't the truth." Jessica pressed her fingers to her temples, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Then what is?" she whispered. Silence. For a moment, she thought they wouldn't answer. Then James spoke, his voice heavier than she had ever heard it before. "You were taken from an orphanage when you were 2 years old." Jessica stilled. Her heart stopped, Her whole body went numb. Catherine wiped at her eyes. "We didn't kidnap you," she insisted quickly. "Not in the way you're thinking." Jessica's stomach twisted violently. "Oh, so you just what? Borrowed me?" Catherine winced. Guilt etched into every line of her face. "We saved you." Jessica let out a hollow laugh. "Saved me?" Her voice broke as she stepped backward, hitting the wall. "From what?" James's face darkened. "From the people who took you first." Jessica's breath hitched. Her hands curled into fists. James ran a hand over his face, exhaustion dripping from his every movement. "You weren't just a missing child, Jessica. You were a stolen child." Her ears were ringing. "The people who took you, they weren't planning to give you a family. You weren't supposed to survive." A sharp chill ran through her. "What are you saying?" James hesitated, but it was Catherine who answered, her voice shaking. "You were damaged goods to them." Jessica's stomach lurched. Damaged? The scar. Her hand flew to her cheek. "No," she breathed. "The fire that gave you that scar," James said, his voice low, careful. "It wasn't our house. It wasn't even ours. The people who took you, they set that fire to get rid of you." Jessica swayed on her feet, her head spinning. Her scar. It wasn't from an accident. It wasn't from some random house fire. It was from a fire set to kill her. "No," she whispered again, but she knew it was true. She had asked Dr. Smith about it. She had questioned why the scars were only on her face. She had known. Somewhere deep down, she had always known something wasn't right. Catherine's lip quivered. "We found you. We got you out before it was too late." Jessica felt like she couldn't breathe. "You stole me," she rasped. "We saved you," James corrected, his voice firm. "And we raised you as our own." Jessica let out a shaky, broken laugh. "Raised me? You lied to me. We had no choice." Catherine sobbed. "You were a baby. You were hurt and alone and—" Her breath hitched. "We knew if the police got involved, they'd put you in the system, and we couldn't let that happen. We wanted to give you a home." Jessica's vision blurred, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "I don't believe you," she whispered. "I don't believe any of this." But she did. She could feel the truth of it sinking into her bones. Her whole life, everything had been built on a lie, and she had no idea who she really was. Jessica's chest rose and fell rapidly as she backed away from her so-called parents. Her mind was a tangled mess of betrayal, confusion, and terror. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run. James and Catherine were still talking, their voices desperate, pleading. But she wasn't listening anymore. Her entire life was a lie. The scar on her face wasn't an accident. She wasn't their daughter. She wasn't even Jessica Fisher. Her body trembled. Her fists clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. She felt like the walls of the camper were closing in on her, suffocating her. And then a knock. A sharp, unexpected rap against the camper door. Jessica's breath hitched. James and Catherine froze. For a long second, no one moved. Then, another knock. "Hello," a deep voice called from outside. "Sorry to bother you, but I don't usually see folks camped out here this time of year. Everything okay in there?" Jessica's stomach flipped. This was her chance. James's entire body tensed. His muscles coiled as if he were about to bolt. Catherine's eyes darted to the door, then back to Jessica, her face pale with panic. "Don't," she whispered, but Jessica was already moving. With everything in her, she lunged toward the door, slamming her palms against it. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice raw, desperate. "They kidnapped me." The campground owner hesitated for half a second. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps, the unmistakable rustle of keys. James grabbed her, his hands wrapped around her waist, yanking her back. "Jessica!" She fought him, hard. She twisted, kicked, screamed at the top of her lungs. Catherine was crying now. "Please don't do this," she begged. "We love you. We were only trying to protect you. Let me go." Jessica shrieked. The door burst open. A man in his 60s stood there, wide-eyed at the scene before him. Jessica thrashing, James gripping her like a lifeline, Catherine standing there, weeping. The campground owner's expression hardened. "Get your hands off her." James hesitated for half a second too long. And in that second, Jessica ripped free. She bolted past him, past Catherine, straight into the cold night air. The campground owner shielded her, stepping between her and the people she had once called Mom and Dad. "Call the cops," Jessica gasped. Her voice was shaking, but she didn't care. "Please, call the police right now." James staggered back, his hands lifting in surrender. "Wait," but the campground owner was already pulling out his phone. "Yeah, we got a situation here," he said into the receiver, his voice clipped and serious. "Possible kidnapping. Kid says she was taken. I need law enforcement down at Whispering Pines campground now." Jessica pressed her hands to her face, her breaths coming in short, ragged bursts. Sirens, distant at first, but growing louder. They were coming. James and Catherine stood frozen in the doorway of the camper, their faces pale, their bodies coiled with tension. Jessica could barely breathe. Her entire body was still trembling from the struggle, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. But she wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. The campground owner was still on the phone, his voice firm as he relayed the situation to the dispatcher. "Yeah, she's safe with me now. The suspects are here." "No, wait." He cut himself off. James moved first. Without another word, without even trying to defend himself, he grabbed Catherine's wrist and bolted. "Hey!" The campground owner barked, but it was too late. They were running. Jessica's stomach dropped as she watched them disappear into the woods, their figures swallowed by the dense blackness of the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. They were running. Her kidnappers, the people who had raised her, who had lied to her, who had stolen her life, were running like criminals. And that's exactly what they were. The campground owner swore under his breath and turned back to Jessica, gripping her shoulder reassuringly. "Stay with me, kid. You're safe now." But Jessica's body was still shaking, her eyes locked on the dark forest. Had they ever planned on telling her the truth? Or were they just going to keep pretending, keep lying, until she stopped asking questions? She didn't know. And now she might never know, because they were gone. Suddenly, sirens,